It's great to see so many people coming out today. And I suppose just as a little bit of background to begin, I'll do a quick introduction and tell us what the format's going to hold ahead of us. So for those, I've met most of you by this stage, but for those who haven't met, my name's Matthew, and I'm one of the co-chairs along with Yaprak Gürsoy of the Turkish Politics specialist group within the PSA. And what we're doing today is we're holding the first and what we hope is going to become a series of book launches, both by our members who want to launch their own books and by other people who might be outside our group who we think may be of interest to our members. So we're very grateful to Çağlar and Ayşe for coming along and agreeing to do this in our first ever one. We're excited to have them on board. And I'll come back to introducing them fully and properly in just a second. But probably first, best to begin by just telling you a little bit about the format of the session today. So we're going to have around about an hour and 45 minutes. We're going to begin with 15-minute presentations from Ayşe and then from Çağlar each. And then we very kindly have Elvira agreeing to act as discussant for Ayşe and Natalie for Çağlar. So we'll give them 15 minutes each. And then we'll turn to half an hour Q&A from everybody who's attended. And this is the main reason why we organized it as a meeting rather than as a webinar. It's so that we could try and recreate a little bit of a more informal atmosphere and we could all just share our thoughts and have a group chat and a group discussion. So while you may want to turn your camera off during Çağlar and Ayşe's talks and so on, it would be great if we could all have them turned on for the Q&A at the end so we can see each other and interact a little bit more. I mean, internet connections permitting, of course, technology permitting. So we have two books today, and so I'll just give a quick rundown, a quick introduction to each of our speakers for today. So first up, we're going to have Ayşe Güneş. Ayşe completed her LLM at the University of Sussex and received her PhD from Brunel University in 2017. Her research interests are in the fields of international human rights law and international public law. She's particularly interested in women's rights, violence against women, domestic violence, feminist legal theory and gender, and she adopts an intersectional approach in her work. She's published several articles and book chapters in these topics, as well as having presented several papers at leading international conferences in places as far afield as Canada, Finland, Poland, and the UK. Currently, Ayşe is a lecturer in the Department of Political Science at Bartın University, and today she's going to be talking about her monograph entitled International Human Rights Law and Crimes Against Women in Turkey, Legislation on So-Called Honor Killings, which was published just last December with Routledge. Then after Ayşe, we're going to hear from Çağlar. Çağlar also completed a master's at Sussex and then completed his PhD at Aberystwyth University in 2014. His research interests are in the field of political Islam, Turkish and Middle Eastern studies, Turkish foreign policy, and democracy and human rights in the Middle East. He's published several op-eds and articles on these topics in places like Open Democracy, Research Turkey, E-International Relations, as well as presenting extensively at various conferences and international conferences, including our own PSA group fairly recently. Following his PhD, he's taken up a post as lecturer in the Department of Political Science at Çankırı Karatekin University. He's also the co-convener of BISA's Southeastern Working Group, I think it's called, Çağlar, and he's a country expert for VDEM on Turkey. Today, he's going to be talking about his book, The Logic of Political Survival in Turkey, The Case of the AKP, which came out, I think it was February or March this year with Lexington. So two very recent and very exciting books. What I'm going to do first off is just hand over to Ayşe for her 15 minutes to take us through it, and then we'll turn to Çağlar. So Ayşe, over to you, please.
Thank you very much. I want to share my PowerPoint slides, if you let me, Matthew. Yes, you're gonna see it's a very mini presentation, just what included in the book. Okay, first it's I'm very thankful to PSA Turkish Politics Specialist Group and their conveners, Yaprak and Matthew, to give this chance for our book promotion. And I'd like to thank Elvira for accepting the discussant role because her feedbacks are very important for me. Firstly, I'm going to give the definition of honor killings and then what they include in the book. As a very specific phenomenon of violence against women, honor killings occur from the domicile to the transnational arena in the everyday and every night lives of women all around the world. According to the United Nations Population Fund, as many as 5,000 women and girls are killed in the name of honor throughout the world every year. A plague that affects every country, honor killing is most prevalent in the Middle East and South Asia. Reports from Latin America and Europe are less common, but do happen. And Turkey so far has failed to adequately prevent honor killings despite taking significant measures to address this phenomenon. And the situation of honor killings in Turkey, therefore, is under international scrutiny in order to eradicate such practices in line with the obligations of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, called as CEDAW, and the Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, called as Istanbul Convention. And honor killing is gender-based violence against women within the family and results in a violation of human rights. And it entails murdering a daughter or wife within the family when she is perceived to have tarnished the reputation or honor of the family. And the victims mostly are women and girls because society has a strong belief that women's misbehaviors such as adultery, divorce, rape, and sexual violation abuse the family dignity. And it is accepted that the so-called honor killings are the most extreme practice of patriarchal mechanism. Honor is used as an excuse and justification for men to wield control over women's social, familial, and sexual roles, and is dictated by a traditional family ideology. In many cases, female victims are subjected to virginity examinations, forced or arranged marriages, and early marriage. When they fail these examinations or reject these marriages, women and girls are killed in the name of honor. Hence, the crime is committed because of the patriarchy that upholds a social system in which the man holds significant power and privilege, while the rights of women are often constrained. As a form of gender-based violence, honor killings are often described as an extreme form of honor-based violence that violates women's human rights. And this book attempts to evaluate the relationship between so-called honor killings and the international human rights law, particularly the Istanbul Convention, using feminist legal and intersectionality perspectives and focusing on Turkey. And this book is based on the hypothesis that despite Turkey's recent positive attempts to eradicate so-called honor killings, legislative and other initiatives are weakened by prevailing cultural stereotypes and perception, the latter constituting the main hindrances to the application of legal provisions that prioritize women's right to life and gender equality. And the foremost intentions of this book are to prove this hypothesis and proceed to making practical recommendations for eliminating the obstacles to eradicate violence against women, particularly so-called honor killings in Turkey. This book aims primarily to consider women's rights, freedom from violence, and particularly honor killings in the context of Turkey. It will do so by analyzing some of the principal national and international human rights laws and evaluating the gaps in the conceptualization of gender equality and due diligence within the domestic and international legal frameworks. And this book is timely because of the many recent improvements in the prevention of violence against women and honor killings at the national and international levels. And the main argument underpinning the book is that the uplifting of the status of women in conjunction with the principle and standards of gender equality and the principle of the state due diligence applied to so-called honor killings is a fundamental means towards eradicating the killing women in the name of honor. And this book also seeks to identify the recent obstacles to preventing so-called honor killings by looking at the effects of the international human rights law agenda on the development of women's rights and the importance of combating violence against women in Turkey. This book maintains that the universal women's rights discourse is an invaluable basis for the challenging discriminatory and oppressive social norms. It aims to illustrate the relevance of this discourse for Turkish women in their consistent struggle for equality and to be free from all discriminatory practices, particularly honor killings. Crucially, this book argues that the Istanbul Convention, which mainly prioritizes the principles of gender equality and the due diligence duty of state law enforcement practitioners, has given an important helping hand to Turkey and its policy on the prevention of honor killings as a gender-based violence against women. This approach highlights Turkey's determination to combat violence against women by ratifying the Istanbul Convention, by enacting the law to protect family and prevent violence against women, and by examining the legal developments adopted through the contributions of the international law and women's rights non-governmental organizations, and the strengths and weaknesses of the law to protect family and prevent violence against women, advocate integrating and responding to gender-related issues in a more detailed, gender-sensitive manner within a feminist lens, since Turkey is obligated to follow a majority of key international human rights treaties. However, shortcomings in the Turkish Penal Code and the law to protect family and prevent violence against women prevent their full compliance with the Istanbul Convention, and two fundamental goals of this book are to identify and isolate those shortcomings. Therefore, this book substantiates the need for the amendments to develop a robust legal infrastructure for preventing women killings in the name of honor. And the book identifies and discusses the obstacles in the domestic and international prevention systems against so-called honor killings by evaluating such systems and their interrelations. Importantly, this book is filling the gap in the legal literature on the prevention of honor killings in Turkey after the adoption of the Istanbul Convention. I see honor killings as a part of a wider issue on women's subordination, and I analyzed these by using a range of legal and international feminist perspectives and being informed by sociological approaches. I have chosen this approach to the existing literature to emphasize how so-called honor killings are a form of gender-based violence arising from the roots of gender inequality between women and men and the prevailing male-dominated mentality in Turkish society. The Turkish state's failure to examine its due diligence duty regarding the prevention, protection, and prosecution of all forms of violence against women, and its application is one of the main challenges in eliminating so-called honor killings. Another challenge for the Turkish state has been its failure to see honor killing as a form of gender-based violence with links to the multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination in the country. This intersectionality within the feminist legal approach therefore offers a comprehensive evaluation of the international instruments related to women's rights, especially CEDAW and the Istanbul Convention, and the Turkish legal provisions that adopted international standards to prevent violations of women's rights. In view of this evaluation, the research offers relevant suggestions for legal amendments designed to change the traditional male-dominated mentality in the institutions and also to make the prevention of honor killings in Turkey a requirement of the Istanbul Convention. Now I'll give the structure of the book briefly. And chapter 2 focuses on the preferred specific theoretical frameworks of honor killings. The chapter will analyze the so-called honor killings through the lens of feminist legal theory in international human rights law. This analysis considers three main themes. Firstly, the discrimination between women and men, reviewed from the liberal feminist perspectives. And secondly, the root of male domination and patriarchy analyzed using radical feminist patterns. And thirdly, the experiences of violence against women that are multiple, fluid, and unstable by applying post-structuralist feminist legal theory. And feminist critiques of international human rights comprise also three issues. Firstly, international human rights established as male rights, and secondly, international law, which runs in the public male world, eliminates private concerns. Therefore, violence against women is seen as a private concern. And thirdly, the issue of essentialism is introduced by third wave feminists, who accuse Western feminists and international human rights bodies of essentializing women in their own image as white, Western, and heterosexual. And this section also demonstrates how these critiques of international human rights law have fed Turkish feminism. And the concept of honor killings in Turkey is defined under the concept of custom or töre killings, and which raises the questions of specifying honor killings in the Kurdish culture. And I will employ the intersectionality approach to help identify how some women, for instance, Kurdish women in Turkey, are more vulnerable to violations of human rights, such as honor killings, because of traditional patriarchal family units, their ethnicity and gender. And chapter 3 explores the main issues underpinning the phenomenon of honor killings, discussing the reasons why it's a violation of many human rights and analyzing how this phenomenon of so-called honor killings came to the attention of the UN. And this book will analyze the obligations to construct equality between women and men, to exercise the state's due diligence duty as a positive obligation to address honor killings in line with the context of the CEDAW and the Istanbul Convention. I will argue that the Istanbul Convention brings more detailed global standards to combating and preventing violence against women by regulating honor killings as a specific provision that further develops the CEDAW Convention principles and standards. And chapter 4 discusses the Turkish legal framework regulating honor killings before the ratification of the Istanbul Convention. It looks into the pause by the Turkish Constitution, then Turkish Civil Code, the Family Protection Law, and the Turkish Penal Code prior to the ratification of the Istanbul Convention. And the vague language is one of the main obstacles to the effective application of the Turkish Penal Code. And this will be demonstrated in case studies of the judicial review, which indicates the need for the clarification of the vague terms, honor killings and töre or custom killings, which are regulated by the Turkish Penal Code. The effects of this vagueness are evident in the inconsistent interpretation of judgments on killings committed in the name of honor. This is a matter of concern in the CEDAW reports, EU progress reports. And I argue that despite Turkish legislation regulated to prevent honor killings, the societal challenges have prevented the efficacy of the law before the ratification of the Istanbul Convention in the chapter 4. And chapter 5 critically examines the legal implications of Turkey's accession to the Istanbul Convention with the challenges of preventing so-called honor killings. I will analyze the law to protect family and prevent violence against women, and will discuss its compatibility with the Istanbul Convention. And this chapter zooms into the influence of the Istanbul Convention on the Turkish legislation to combat violence against women. It therefore interrogates the violations of women's gender equality guaranteed by the Constitution and the violations of state law enforcement officers' due diligence duty guaranteed by the law to protect family and prevent violence against women and the Turkish Penal Code. Chapter 6 is a conclusion that offers applicable suggestions constructed on the theoretical and practical applications based on the 4 main chapters. And it also presents a brief summary of the book. And in the conclusions, I introduce practical recommendations based on the foundations of my feminist analysis in the main chapters, and assessing the significance of the substantial legal reform to eliminate honor killings is an obligation imposed by the Istanbul Convention. And making amendments to the Turkish Penal Code, including the term of honor killings as an unacceptable justification and the motive of honor as an aggravating circumstance, will prevent the inconsistent interpretations by the judiciary of women killings committed in the name of honor. And instituting effective training to law enforcement personnel and expanding existing efforts to establish a special task for police units to combat and investigate honor killings throughout Turkey will indicate the political will to eliminate honor killings. And thank you for listening. This is the contents of my book, hopefully.
That is excellent. Thank you very much, Ayşe. And perfect timing. Came in exactly on 15 minutes. So I doff my hat for a very interesting presentation. and perfect timing. So a high bar set for you, Çağlar, but if you don't mind, hand over to you to take over and take us through your book.
Thank you. Now I'm sharing my screen. Like Ayşe, I have a small presentation for today. And the first, I would like to thank you, the PSA Turkish specialist group and the group conveners, Matthew and Yaprak, to give this chance for us for early career scholars to present their books. And thanks to Begüm for the advertising process of our book launch event. And thanks to Natalie for her discussant role, because her feedbacks and comments are important for me, especially for my book. And today I will talk about the logic of political survival in Turkey. And you can see my book title in here. And before going to give more detail about the structure of the book, I would like to show the two another different pictures, picture of the books. Before I started my PhD, I haven't heard anything about the concept or the term of the political survival. But my first PhD supervisor offered to read these books because I haven't heard the term of the political survival, but especially at the end of the 20th century, we saw a number of studies on political survival by different thinkers, by different political analyzers. And building on insights that were proposed by many scholars, the concept of the political survival has gained popularity in the literature, following of Bruce Buena Mesquita and his colleagues' book, The Logic of Political Survival. While trying to explain about the AKP period during my PhD, I will decide to concentrate this perspective, especially the Mosquita's book and the Mosquita's selectorate theory, because they are the first scholars to design as a conceptual framework and around this nation. And after this book, they published another book, which is The Dictator's Handbook. And when I solved this question, it's very interesting for me why bad behavior is almost always a good politics. When I thought this question, okay, why I did not concentrate this question about the AKP case in Turkish politics. Because these scholars examine the theme of the domestic political survival in the context of a range of political, economic, and the foreign policy issues, such as the revolution or the civil war, through the application of the more quantitative methods. And De Mesquita and his colleagues drove attention to the political survival as a central aim of the political leaders or the parties. And De Mesquita argues that, okay, the actions that a leader makes and takes constitute how he or she governs. And what, for a leader, is the best way to govern? The answer how to best govern. The first to come to power. Second, to stay in power. And the last, to control as much national revenue as possible all along the way. And De Mesquita and his colleagues show the three political dimensions which can break the political landscape: the nominal selectorate, the real selectorate, and the Winnie coalition. Two dimensions is important. The nominal selectorate means that the voters who vote the leaders or the parties in the countries. The Winnie coalition is that the essential support to continue of the parties or the leaders' power in the country. And according to this theory, if the Winnie coalition is small and the nominal selectorate is large, the leader has a great chance to control the country with more authoritarian ways. And this situation, this colleague situation is called by this colleague as an autocracy or authoritarian regimes. On the other hand, if the Winnie coalition and nominal selectorate is large, it provides the least amount of the stability to a leader's occupancy of power, the whole power. And a system known as a democracy or the democratic regimes. And this study argues that, my book argues that this theory can be useful to explain the dynamics of AKP government and the change of the AKP's policies between 2002 and 2018. After this finding about the political survival, my book and my research requires empirical evidence in this step. And it also uses evidence from the elite interviews. My main methodology, data collection method, is elite interviews. And then party documents, political party documents, public speech, or the developments and the change in the AKP's policies. And in my book, we can see these evidences in the chapter 2, 3, 4, and the 5. You can see in the table of the contents. And in the, especially in the chapter 2, explores why the legitimizing of the AKP's conservative identity, because this is the first independent variable of AKP's political survival in Turkish politics. Especially this term is the AKP's first term between 2002 and 2007. And this is a significant time period in showing the AKP's progression in Turkish democracy and developing and understanding how it legitimizes its conservative identity. We can see many external factors or the internal factors. For example, if we look at the internal factors, we can see the notion of 28 February 1997 military coup process. Or external factors, we can see the support of the United States and the Western countries to the AKP due to the international context of 9/11. And these factors also played a crucial role in legitimization of AKP's conservatism. And this process, this legitimization process, is seen as a precondition for ensuring its political survival. Most of the Turkish scholars in the academia discuss, okay, AKP would prefer the democracy or not. My answer is not related about the democracy. My answer is directly related about the ensuring of the political survival. Following of this term, and as I said, the Mosquito claims that if the winning coalition is large and if the nominal electorate is large, the system likes more democratic regimes. And in the first term of the AKP, we can see, if you look at the AKP's winning coalition, we can see many actors from the Turkish society, like liberals, like the center-right actors or the Western business associations like TÜSİAD. And yes, the AKP's winning coalition is large and the nominal electorate is large. As a result of this, yes, the system would like a democracy in the Turkey between 2002 and 2007. However, after 2007, we can see the change according to this political survival theories by the Mosquito. In the Mosquito's theory, the leaders or the political parties consolidate their power by minimizing their winning coalition. Against threats, their survival. Okay, the next question, what were the threats? AKP has faced the two significant threats to the survival: the 2007 military coup attempt and 2008 AKP's closure trial. And after surviving these threats, AKP chose to consolidate its power by fighting against the secular Kemalist elites in Turkish politics. And these are the second independent variable of my causal mechanism of the AKP's political survival. However, when AKP began to fight against the Kemalist elite, AKP should keep a large nominal electorate, according to this theory. As a result of this, AKP had to propagate an even more Islamic line to win the support of the conservative voters in the elections. On the other hand, the policy change was a condition for the survival of the AKP during this the period. And I used, as I said, the party documents or the legal change in the Turkish politics or the elite interviews. And chapter 4, after this period, after the 2011, chapter 4 focused on the third term of the AKP, which is a real turning point, especially in terms of the rise of populism. As you can see in the chapter 4, the rise of populism. And just wait, yeah. And these are important period for understanding this turning point. And as I discussed in my previous chapters, one of the most important factors contributing to survival of leaders and parties has been to keep the nominal electorate or the voters as large as possible and minimize their winning coalition. If the leader or the party would like to control the whole country. However, the AKP broke the winning coalition, the large winning coalition, from its founding philosophy and eliminated its coalitional partners one by one. But these coalitional partners, ex-coalitional partners, defined themselves as specifically secular. And as a tension with the secularists grew from the 2007, AKP had to assume a policies that were more Islamist than the populist, especially to retain the large nominal electorate. And the impending question is, how did the AKP gain the support of the majority votes of the voters? And my book highlights the third independent variable, linking the cause and effect relationship of the AKP's political survival. And the chapter 4 focuses on the AKP's populist strategies. I put in my book, there are some specific populist strategies like anti-Westernism, anti-intellectualism, or the conservative family policies, conservative women policies, or another specific strategies during this period. And AKP carried out that populist strategy between secular and the conservative citizens in the Turkey. This is a strategy, exactly a strategy to consolidate his power in Turkish politics. And after 2014, we can see the completely different picture in the Turkish politics. But it is related to the same situation. It's related to the same strategy to ensure the political survival. After the 2014 presidential elections, AKP's policy line evolved into a new way. With these elections, Erdogan was convinced that the Kurdish movement and the Gülen movement could become a threat to AKP's political survival. And the AKP government needed a new paradigm to put this struggle into political adjustment. And we can see some populist agenda against the secularists between 2011 and 2014, but we can see the new two enemies against the AKP regime. How AKP would fight against these two actors? Erdogan and the AKP government needed a different paradigm to consolidate of the electoral base, to consolidate large nominal electorate. And during this period, we can see the rise of Turkish nationalism, which started in the peace process, which is the peace process between the AKP and the Kurdish movement. And this rising trend would run for the help of the AKP during this period. And the AKP government started to combine or started to instrumentalize Islamism and the nationalism during this period. And this is the last independent variable to explore the survival of the AKP during this period. There are many evidences to show this fourth independent variable during this period. If you ask about specific issues in the QA part, I will be happy to answer this. I know that I don't have any time to explain all of this, but I would like, when I will try to do the concluding points about my project, I would like to say that I tried to the different perspective of the works in terms of the Turkish literature. When I checked the Turkish literature, I saw that, we can see many books, many articles about the AKP period, but most of them, maybe all of them, I don't know, most of them is based on the periodically. We can see, for example, the first term of the AKP period, we can see many articles, many books about EU accession process, democratization process. Or after 2014, we can see many articles about the clash between AKP and the Kurdish movement, or the clash between AKP and the Fethullah Gülen movement. But we couldn't see any works about analyzing of the whole AKP period from 2000 to up to now. I tried to analyze it. I tried to analyze the AKP period integrally, with using this new concept that I haven't seen in the literature of the Turkish politics. I'm sure that I have some misunderstood. I have some missing points or mistakes when I did it, but I tried to do different things in my PhD research and in my book. Thanks for your attention and welcome your question and comments about my book. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Çağlar. That was a very interesting talk from both of you. So really wonderful start to it. Thank you very much, both. We've also had two people who very kindly agreed to be discussants for us, so we're very grateful to them. First up, we have Elvira Dominguez-Redondo from Middlesex University, who's going to chat to us about Ayşe's book and some of the issues raised by Ayşe. So I'll hand over to you, Elvira, when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here today and to revisit a bit the research of Ayse. I already had the pleasure, I didn't realize it was 4 years ago already. Time flies. I had the pleasure already to be her external examiner when she defended her PhD at Brunel University. It's probably one of the biggest privilege of academic work is you are engaging constantly with new research and projects you would like yourself to have written about, but you have other younger, more passionate than you people doing it. And it's always a pleasure to enter these other fields that you're not as familiar and to get to know more. And honor killings definitely belongs to that category. And I do believe the book is an immense contribution to the field. I think honor killings are misunderstood by the general population, but also by those who are actually experts in human rights law. Basically, I think too, because of this other gap on understanding feminist approaches to law, understanding women's rights, understanding all these other layers that are fundamental to be able to engage with such a complex issue as honor killings are. And there's always this also, it's not only the perspective from a feminist perspective, it's also these other structural differences that are ingrained in law and ingrained in international law and in human rights law of honor killings and something that happens to these countries from the South, whatever other terminology we want to use, but it's something that we want to also associate to some societies and not others. So it is extremely interesting to enter this from the perspective that Ayse does so well, which is categorize it, conceptualize it, theorizing the framework from feminist perspectives. She uses liberal, radical, and post-structuralist perspectives and explains her approach, but then is reflected also in the book and how she structures the research, because this is something that I also particularly like about the book, and I think it's really important. It is often the case that we find literature that introduces us to certain theories, but then these theories are not really embedded in the content of the book. And this is not the case here. Okay, so I'm very happy if Ayse decides to contradict me here, and I have understood this differently than I should, but I think the liberal approach is very much on the foundations of equality between men and women and the whole human rights approach, while acknowledging the limits of this human rights approach and law through what could be the radical feminist lenses, and acknowledging that international law and human rights law has always been written through the lenses of males. I mean, if we enter today the Council of Europe website and you enter it in French, you will find that this apparently impossible nowadays still to change droit de l'homme by droit humain, to change rights of the man by human rights in a translation that will be not so male dominated. Apparently that's something that will blow up the French mind somehow. So there are limits on trying to use as a tool a legal framework that has been conceived from a male gaze to address problems that this male gaze is creating. And so the radical perspective is there too. And then you have the post-structural perspective on the acknowledgement that these attempts to address an issue need to be localized. You probably need to do what the book does. You need to look at a particular place with a particular set of coordinates. In this case is Turkey, but it needs to be localized because you will find local issues and you will need to address them. These universal frameworks will not be enough to understand, to diagnose, and then to try to find solutions. So I think the book does this very well. Okay. And it's in that sense, again, a very big contribution in that sense, but also I do think with honor killings, I mean, I would like to ask also, what will be for you, and to introduce your voice to whatever I'm saying, to what will be for you in the last 4 years? Where do you think things are going? Are we moving towards something in terms of dealing with honor killings in general, and in Turkey in particular, are we getting more harmonization or even more fragmented approaches to this? What would you say?
Yeah, no, in the international human rights frame, I think they all consist all of the women killings, and under the title of femicides, you know, Dubravko Simonovic as a specialist for the women, you know, violence against women. She's always saying, you know, you need to collect the data on the femicides. So they are not separating as a honor killings or under the name of the other killings as well. They are not saying, just they are using under the name of femicides. And in Turkey, unfortunately, we have still these big issues. And today, the last day, you know, tomorrow Turkey will leave the Istanbul Convention. So I don't think so, you know, Turkey is progressing now on the women's rights, and in particularly, you know, honor killings as well. We have data from the NGOs, women NGOs especially, and also the other women NGO, you know, they are working with the government as well. They say around last year, they have around 300 women killed. So, but they don't know, you know, how many of them are honor killings. So so I can say there's not progression in the, you know, eliminating all the violence against women, and in particular honor killings, unfortunately.
It's a bit depressing. I think we had this discussion during your Vivat, which I clearly remember was very important in making me think. And very recently I've been approached, I had this discussion on it was about other Central Asian countries and the Central European, countries, and also this question of honor killings. And I wonder, I've done that since I read your work also, about the limits of human rights and how difficult it is to treat honor killings within the framework we have on violence against women in the family, and how, and you do reflect this very well. The human rights success, probably in terms of women's rights, one of the most important ones has been to break this private versus public, yes, to understand that there is state duties, and you explain them very well, state duties towards entering the family and to protect women within the family and to break this barrier. But once human rights has done this, it hasn't understood in the term of honor killings, that honor killings are not like your typical partner kills or partner exercise violence against a woman. This is like being killed by the mafia. It's not, it's more organized crime than it is your partner specifically. So while it is linked to your family, there's not a particular culprit. You have an organized structure, and it can be any person within that structure. So identifying the person who really killed doesn't matter as much. It's like terrorists or the mafia. It's much more about the structure. And it's more like fighting gangs. So there is a complication about going forward, I feel, beyond human rights, beyond what we have done already. And it's extremely I think you have a lifetime of research ahead of you and contributions to make on this topic. And I'm sure many others will have. I was also listening to the other presentation about political survival and wondering also how linked it might all be on these politics and women and where we are going in terms of changing structural issues in our societies. And it's quite complex, but also, I mean, a big, exciting challenge to take forward. And I do believe we are making very small progresses, even if it is about, we see what's happening, and that's already a big, big progress. And congratulations again. It's real pleasure to engage with this again and this wonderful panel and company. So I'm going to leave it here and allow space also for other questions that many others I'm sure will have. Congratulations.
Thank you very much, Elvira. That was excellent and a really good way to set up subsequent discussions and some really interesting points raised. So thank you so much. Natalie, over to you, please.
Oh, you can all hear me now, yeah? Do let me know if you can't. Okay, first of all, I'd also like to say congratulations to both authors. I think there are links between these two books, as Elvira just mentioned, and I'll come on to that in a wee while. I will definitely be ordering both for my reading list for my course on Turkish politics. So if I can just cover Çağlar's book first, what it talks about is both the political history of the Turkish Republic. Actually, so it's a good primer for anyone who just wants to sort of get into that. It does that very generally, and then it focuses specifically on basically a political history of the AKP and how it fits into everything that had gone previously. So it's an excellent primer for anyone who wants to get into that. I mean, I'm mainly an IR theory specialist, so I'd heard of Desquita and Smith, but I know a lot more about it now, and it's a really interesting approach and a highly original approach to looking at Turkish politics. And I think the Dictator's Handbook is really, really interesting, actually. Sometimes I think Erdogan may have written it himself. So political survival theory was an excellent choice as a lens through which to see Turkish politics, which was very good for me because, I've previously tended to view it through IR theories. So this, opened my eyes and gave me a different way of looking at basic information, which I'm very familiar with, and I'm seeing it through a new window. But what political survival theory does is to explain how individuals, parties get power, and then how they maintain that power, both of which is quite difficult, you know, so extreme measures have to be taken. And what he argues, as Çağlar has said, that you need a coalition of support which appeals to a electorate, you know, basically appeals to your voters. And if you can get that balance right and throw in some populism, stroke authoritarianism, stroke nationalism, then you're onto a winning formula. And Çağlar has very, very effectively applied that to the Turkish scenario as a case study. So basically what he's argued has happened in Turkey over the last 20 years is that the coalition of elite support has gradually shrunk, has gradually got smaller, which means that the need for populism, stroke authoritarianism, I'll come back to that point, has increased. So there's kind of a balancing act going on. And, you know, we're now down to a very small coalition of support at elite level, and the need for a lot of populism at the selectorate level in order to maintain power. And this leads to repression of opposition groups and increasing authoritarianism. So where I think it actually overlaps with Ayşe's book is that it also needs increasing populism, and I think the women's rights issue obviously plays into that, and the whole honor killings, and certainly the Istanbul Convention. I would see that purely as a political tool. But anyway, we'll come back to that. It also, this is where it overlaps with my own work, my more recent work on, you know, news media freedom as well. So it's any kind of challenge to the orthodoxy. If that plays well with the selectorate, that will be used as such. So this is complex, and Çağlar's book explains the interaction over the last 20 years in particular, but also prior to that, of Kemalism, Gülenism, and, you know, the Kurdish issue, which are obviously intertwined. Now this is complex in Turkish politics because these allegiances are constantly changing. So, you know, you just think you've mastered it and it changes. And everything depends on which time period you're talking about. And that can come down to very fine margins, which is why it's so difficult. And, you know, I'll come back to this later, but that's why the international community, you know, just don't understand Turkey, because it takes a lot of keeping up with, but I'll come back to that. Ironically, I think the Kemalists may have come a full circle. I think they're back in favor, certainly in the military. This is what I hear. You know, so the Kemalists, having been expunged during the Ergenekon period, are now less bad than the Gülenist aspect of the military, but, you know, we'll come back to that. So I think any criticism of de Mesquita and Smith's approach, which Çağlar touches on in his book, is purely meta-theoretical. So this is where the political theory approach falls between positivism and post-positivism. And I think all the criticisms of de Mesquita and Smith are based, is because it's not positivist enough. And I would argue, as a post-positivist, that why would you be positivist if, you know, if you're a post-positivist anyway? So I wouldn't say they are not valid criticisms. And I think this area studies approach, which is where I would situate this work, is entirely valid. I mean, no theory covers everything, but I wouldn't view that as a valid criticism of it. So I think the methodology section is very thorough. Whether you need such a thorough methodology section in a monograph as opposed to a PhD is another issue, but I guess that's between you and your editors, Çağlar. And as I say, you know, the post-positive aspect, I think, should have been played up a little, and the positivism played down. I see why you needed to do that in a PhD setting. So moving on to the content then. You've basically divided it up into 4 time periods. So you have 2002 to 2007, which was the consolidation of AKP power, which they did, and I would agree, through the legitimization of social conservatism. Yeah. So this is where they very effectively persuaded the international community that they were basically liberal Democrats, albeit Islamist, but still liberal Democrats. They certainly persuaded the Labour government at the time that that was the case, or perhaps it was convenient for the Labour government at the time to believe that that was the case. You know, so it's a minor point. I have many times tried to track down Jack Straw, who was the Foreign Secretary at that time, to get him to explain his thinking, and he never returns my calls. I think it's because he knows that, you know, he basically got it very wrong at that time. So the first section, and you know, this corresponds to chapter 2, I think it was 2002 to 2007. That's where the AKP bedded into power. The second section is 2007 to 2011, and this is where they really began to consolidate power by decreasing the power of the Kemalist establishment, primarily at that time the military. And this is where the whole Ergenekon sledgehammer investigations come into it. Even at this time, most of the international community, I say the Americans, the EU, certainly the British government, was still under the impression that the AKP were liberal Democrats, perhaps less liberal than they previously thought, but still they thought they were Democrats. And this was partly because the military had formed, you know, it had a pretty bad reputation. So there's, as with all the best, you know, all the best lies, there is a small element of truth to it, but it wasn't until 2010, 2011 when the international community actually woke up to the direction in which the AKP government was going. We can talk about the EU's role in that, but you know, that's not part of this book, you know, so I can come back to that if necessary. So that's 2007 to 2011. And then the next section is 2011 to 2014, which is what Çağlar charts the rise of populism and authoritarianism during this period. This is where I may question it slightly. I would say the authoritarianism had begun much sooner. Certainly after 2007, Ergenekon is pretty authoritarian. But we can come back to that in, you know, in the question and answer session. And then the fourth section, the fourth time period rather, is 2014 to 2018. So this is basically post Gezi Park and post the split with the Gülen movement, where Çağlar argues that Islamism and nationalism has increased as the coalition has decreased. So in this situation, the coalition of elite support for the AKP began by being most moderate, secular, some Kurdish groups, you know, certainly the Gülen movement were all behind the AKP. By 2014, they'd all gone. Mainly because there was a huge power struggle, and you know, and the rising authoritarianism meant you don't really want anyone questioning your decisions around you, but certainly by 2014 they'd gone. Therefore, the populism has needed to rise in order to maintain the, you know, basically the voter constituency and to maintain support. So I'm just checking how much time I've got left. So to start summing this up then, it's broken down Turkish politics into those 4 very neat sections, which I would broadly definitely agree with. I think it's an excellent backgrounder on the AKP in terms of politics and history and the level of detail. It illustrates very effectively, and you have inspired me to go back to my own work on this actually, about how the international community got it so wrong and why. I think there's a lot of questions to be asked there. Were they not paying attention, or was it convenient not to pay close attention? Which is another option. I'm slightly concerned about the Gülen movement in this book. It's slightly woolly, and while I do understand why there is a need for woolliness, I would have liked to have seen that outlined perhaps just a little bit more clearly. I think there are real questions that have to be asked about the role of the Gülen movement in Ergenekon and sledgehammer investigations. And you do touch on that. And then, of course, after 2014, the Gülen movement was the recipient of the illiberalism they had pioneered during Ergenekon. So you have that shift from being a perpetrator to a victim of illiberality, which is, again, which is why Turkish politics so complex because you have these constantly changing allegiances. I think the role of Gülen in the attempted coup in 2016 is contested, and I would have liked to see more evidence for the statement that it was a definite Gülen coup. I don't know if it was. I have never met anyone who knows. So if you're going to say that, I think you need to say how you know that. And if you don't know it, you can't say that. I would completely agree about the role of the Kurdish movement in this. They have, it was necessary to quash the Kurds after 2015 in order to maintain the populist approach to politics. And they certainly, the rise of Islamism and nationalism is keeping the MHP happy. So to bring it to a conclusion, there are a few questions for discussion, which I'd like to highlight. Is first one, when did authoritarianism start in Turkey? So when did it shift from being illiberal to authoritarian? I would certainly say the roots go back to 2007, 2008, but up for discussion. Secondly, the role of Gülen, and the whole idea of from perpetrator to victim, and is it ever possible to know what happened in 2016? Another question. And lastly, and this is where it does link back to Ayşe's book, is that sort of instrumental use of these populist causes, so very social conservative causes, is that populism? Is it authoritarianism? Is it Islamism? And again, that's probably a huge question. And I would commend both books to the room, and I will certainly be ordering both at the library. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalie. And thank you to all four people. Virtual round of applause to you for setting the scene for us. I'm sorry we can't really give you one in person. Exactly, it'll be a silent round of applause. But thank you to all four, which really contributed to set a very firm foundation for what I hope is going to be a very interesting discussion. For questions, I'd like to turn it out to a Q&A to people in front of us. And then that'll also, when we come to Çağlar, responding to some of those other questions, you can also respond to some of the things Natalie raised. I know Ayşe's already responded to Elvira. In order to questions, if people wouldn't mind just raising a virtual hand for me. If you don't know how to do it, it's just the reactions tab at the bottom, then select raise hand. And then I can go to people to ask questions. I did see a flurry of three from Elvira, Sevgi and Begum, but Elvira and Sevgi have stepped back from the brink. Perhaps something will come up later, or maybe I've missed the hands. But Begum, over to you to ask a question first, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank you to all the Matthew and Yaprak, and also this amazing group for the opportunity. My question is to Çağlar. He said that in chapter 2, he talked about the legitimization of AKP's conservatism in Turkish politics. So I didn't have the access to his book yet, so I don't have any idea. My question is that, does he talk about the legal regulations that AKP did, like the lift of the headscarf ban? Or then this would mean like a legalization of conservatism, maybe, I don't know. But what does he mean when he says legitimization of conservatism? This is my question. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Begum. I'll take another question as well. We might as well build a couple up. Mohammed, you're next on my list.
Yes, hello. Is my voice clear?
Yeah, it is.
Yes.
Indeed.
Well, also, I would like to say additional thanks to both presenter of the two books, as well as the fantastic two discussants. And another additional question to Çağlar. I think I have seen the book. Actually, I have it, and I'm in my middle journey reading it, and I noticed that the book is very well organized, which is helpful for many researchers just to read the whole book or even some part of it. In continuation from the discussant of the book of Çağlar, in which the book goes through 4 time periods, and beginning with a legitimation of conservatism, and then struggle with Kemalism, through populism and authoritarianism, and then internationalization of Islamism and nationalism. Does the book go through the idea of pragmatism? Because the concept of pragmatic, whether of Turkish foreign policy or in particular the AKP foreign policy, has been investigated and questioned and even doubted a lot from the perspective of pragmatic politics. So when you see the rhetoric of AKP speakers, whether from a national perspective or from Islamic perspective, people would say even those four periods of time in the book could be considered as under the pragmatic concept. So I would like to see whether you agree with pragmatism as a mother, let's say, time period, including all the four time periods, or could be the future fifth time period, let's say from 2018 until the next election. And thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. Why don't we go to Çağlar to answer some of those questions before we build up too much? And then Ayşe, I think there was some things also raised by Elvira and by Natalie that may well be relevant to you. If you wanted to add anything after Çağlar's spoken, we'll turn to you too.
Yes, thank you so much. I have many questions now, and I would like to reply at first to the Begüm and Mohammed's question. Then I return to Natalie's points and the questions about my book. The first, the Begüm asked about how AKP legitimizes conservatism. Especially in this chapter, I try to make a more political history from the Milli Görüş movement. And if you look at the Milli Görüş movement's history, we can see it 28 February 1997 military coup process. And if you look at the Milli Görüş policies against the military powers or against the international community, we couldn't see an effective policy to support from especially international community. And the international community supported the Kemalist bureaucracy, Kemalist military powers, rather than the welfare party in the 28th February military coup process. And the AKP, I think AKP has took many lessons from the Milli Görüş movement, welfare party, because the AKP is aware of that. Okay, we must get a support from the United States, the European Union, if we try to fight against the Kemalist elites or the military powers. The first thing, okay, because the AKP's staff and the founding staff came from the Milli Görüş movement, and they were aware of that. Okay, the military powers completely opposed will oppose the AKP's establishment. It's some parts of this true, completely true. But the AKP was aware that, okay, we need to legitimize our conservatism. Because, okay, if we couldn't legitimize this, our conservative concept in terms of the international community's perspective, we couldn't alive. This is because of this, as I said, the survival. The welfare party is completely unsuccessful to ensure the political survival, but AKP was has succeeded. How AKP do this? We can see the concept of conservative democracy. If you look at the AKP's party documents or the AKP's the first document, yes, this is the adoption of the conservative democracy into the AKP's party policies. You mentioned about, for example, headscarf ban, but we couldn't see any serious attempts to lift the headscarf ban during the first period. Because of this, AKP wouldn't do this due to the lesson from Milli Görüş movement. And we couldn't see any, for example, the legal change about the alcohol or another issues like today we discussed, especially during the pandemic situation in Turkey. But we couldn't see any legal regulations about AKP's identity, conservative identity. But AKP wasn't, okay, withdrawn that about his conservative identity due to electoral base. This is the new concept, you said, the adaptation of the conservative democracy into Turkish politics. AKP did do it during the first term, but after the first term, we can see completely different picture about this concept. For the Mohammed question, I completely agree with you. Thanks for your comments about my book. I am happy to see, because if you look at the books, you can see when I try to explain the political survival in the first chapter, I started with the Sun Tzu and the Machiavelli, especially the Machiavelli is, you know, the most pragmatic person in the world history and the political history. And the AKP is completely pragmatist. But I try to engage this pragmatism into the new theory, the political theory. When I read the Mosquito and his colleagues' books, okay, I saw it. I saw this pragmatism into this the politics. As I said, why the Mosquito asked why bad behavior is almost always good politics. This is the pragmatic question. From the Machiavelli to the Recep Tayyip Erdogan, it doesn't see any the big change to the politics. But I wouldn't prefer to use only, okay, if we try to make the AKP analysis, we will need to use only pragmatism. It will be a bit simple for understanding the whole period, but I completely agree the pragmatism, and I expected that AKP will continue with it, this pragmatism into the next elections. But I'm sure that we can see engagement between this pragmatism and the political survival theories. Thanks for this question. And the Natalie's question are important. Thanks you so much. Thanks for your feedbacks, your comments, as I said, is very, very important for me. And you asked, when did the authoritarianism start? I completely said that we can see the first notions, first steps of the authoritarianism with 2007. Most of the people in the Turkish academia, you know, you said that didn't accept it. And if you look at the articles, I checked the Turkish literature, especially in my literature review, I try to look at the articles about it. And if you look at the articles in 2007 and 2011, in both international community and the Turkish academia was not aware of this authoritarianism due to another reasons that you mentioned. But we can see the first notions, especially during the Balyoz cases, or especially during the 2010, for example, constitutional referendums. We can see some important legal changes for understanding this authoritarianism in Turkish law, in the Turkish legal perspective. Or if you look at some, for example, investigations against the journalists, like I mentioned in my book about the cases Ahmet Şık, or the cases Hanefi Avcı, or the Oda TV case, for example. These are, I think, the complete evidence to show the AKP's authoritarianism. But if you look at the real authoritarianism, or if you look at the more pressure to the secular parts of the Turkish society, because of this, I would prefer to use the term of authoritarianism in the from the 2011. Maybe I will. Maybe I should change the title. Maybe I will focus on the populism. I don't know, but authoritarianism is the same because AKP was not withdrawn the authoritarianism today or in these days. But I would like to stress more about the authoritarian populism in this chapter. But I completely said that the authoritarianism started with after 2007. This is an important point for me. The second question is about Gülen movement's role in the 15 July coup attempt. I think there are many discussions about it, but if you look at some civilians that I mentioned in my book, some civilians who arrested in the Akıncı Air Base, during this coup attempt. When I check this, the 5 civilians, one of them is Adiluxus and another the part of civilians, completely we can see a connection between these persons and the Gülen movement. But if you look at another opinions about from the, for example, Gülen movement's parts, they believe that these are the agent of the Turkish states, Adiluxus or others. But I didn't do any certain answer about it. But if you look at some, for example, Hakan Yavuz is, an important, I think, scholar who ties the Gülen movement, and he argued that we can see the notion of the Gülen movement's reaction in the 15 July coup attempt, but we can see another actors during this attempt, like for example, if you look at the militaries within the coup attempt, we can see another actors, maybe some Kemalists attended this coup attempt, some another people in the military powers attended this coup attempt. It's possible. It's possible. But if you look at the more detailed knowledge about the behind of the coup attempt, I didn't think that the Gülen movement has no effect of the 15 July coup attempt. It's so normal. It's so more strategically, because in my book I try to discuss it. We can say a coalition between AKP and Gülen movement after the 2007. It's so normal because both of them are opposed to the Kemalist bureaucracy. However, we can see, as I said, a strategical. If you look at it strategically, the Gülen movement would like to control more, control more power in the Turkish state. The AKP didn't want to share its power with the Gülen movement. It's so normal, and I think if the Gülen movement was behind of the 15 July coup attempt, it's no surprise for me because of this the clash interest between these two actors. Because of this, it's so normal. But as you said, most of the people discuss about who were behind of the 15 July coup attempt. And the last issue Natalie asked about the Ayşe, about the Istanbul Convention. Now we are preparing an article with the Ayşe about the legal and political challenge of the Istanbul Convention, and maybe I will say very briefly, we discussed about the notion of conservatism, especially during the withdrawal of the Istanbul Convention during this period. I think the conservatism is always an important, and if you look at the political survival concept, I think the importance of the Milli Görüş and the Felicity Party, Saadet Party's role are one of the important issue when AKP withdrawn the Istanbul Convention. We can see a bargaining process between AKP and the Felicity Party, Saadet Partisi, during these discussions. And this is related about the conservative politics. This is my only point. Maybe Ayşe will explain another things about this issue. Thank you so much for this question.
Thank you, Çağlar. I know, Ayşe, you partly had a chance to respond to Elvira partway through, but if there was anything else that you'd raise, you'd like to add or anything like that, please go ahead, and then I'll take a couple more questions.
Okay. I can just say that, we while we are writing the paper about the legal and political challenges of the Istanbul Convention, and the decision, or the presidential decision, is a shock for me, especially because I didn't expect that for the withdrawal of the convention. Because when we look at the other, most of the part of the, I think, parliamentarians or the AKP, I thought that they are supporting the Istanbul Convention. And also when we look at the other, KADEM Association, Women and Democracy Association, which is vice chief is you're hearing me, yeah? Vice President is Erdogan's daughter. And they are also supporting the Istanbul Convention. They are saying we need to comply with the Istanbul Convention. We need to implement the Istanbul Convention fully. And then after the decision, we heard, you know, for the withdrawal, and we shocked. And the Kadem also changed its, how can I say, its statements also. And they're saying on the violence against women, I can say that they now say they are preparing for a very good legal frame on the eliminating of violence against women in Turkey, and they don't need the Istanbul Convention. So it challenges also, I can raise the question as well, if we don't need the International Human Rights Law Convention, why we are always, you know, signed and ratified the conventions then in Turkey? It's another question for me as well. I need to, I think, search about that. So the Istanbul Convention is, I think, is a very important tool for the, not just for the Europe and the beyond, and because it's legally binding document for the elimination of violence against women. Because we have also CEDAW as well, but CEDAW in its original text, we cannot see the, you know, the verse on the violence against women. It's all about the discrimination against women forms, we can say. But in CEDAW's general recommendations, especially 19 and numbered 19, and also the other one is 35, also just regulating on the violence against women. After the Istanbul Convention, the numbered 19, general recommendations numbered 19 is how can I say, is adopting and is again bringing very large scale on the violence against women. So it's numbered again 35, and it's referring as well the Istanbul Convention, because bringing details on the prevention, protection, and also punishment, and also integrated policies on the violence against women. That can I say, this is the legal challenges, I think, during the AKP government. When I started my PhD, they has just signed the convention. And then I was so, you know, excited. I'm going to study and research on this new topic, because it's a new convention. And then now I finished all my PhD, and then my book, my monograph is already come out, and then I see that Turkey withdrew the convention. It's very disappointing for me, that can I say.
On that pessimistic note, Ayşe, let me take a couple more questions.
Okay.
Bora, and then Sylvia, please. Bora to begin.
Sure. Hi again. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to ask a quick question concerning Çağlar's book. Hi, Çağlar. Happy to see you after our panel in PSA conference in March. Again, you know, we are seeing each other, but, you know, all white virtually. Thank you very much for concisely presenting your book. It was quite interesting to see in what ways you benefited from the previous literature on political survival to explain the political survival of the AKP between 2002 and 2018. In this respect, I'd like to ask you a quick question from the point of methodology, I would say. You're employing 4 independent variables that occur in different periods of time during AKP's rule. You know, by this way, you claim that these explanatory variables lead to the survival of AKP. At this point, you know, in parallel to similar to some of Natalie's comments on your book as well, I wonder how you handled the interactions among these 4 variables. You know, in other words, I wonder how or to what extent you establish connections among those variables while you were systematically and consistently analyzing these 18 years long or 16 years long AKP rule. Thank you.
Thank you, Bora. Sylvia.
Thank you. Hi. First of all, let me extend to both authors my congratulations on these books and very great presentations and discussion. I think I have a quick question for Çağlar too. I found this topic, the topic of your book, really fascinating, and especially as it overlaps with my own dissertation project, which focuses on the interaction between regime change and intra-party politics in Turkey. So I was really curious to know whether throughout your research, as you were compiling your project, and especially through the many elite interviews you conducted. I should start by saying that I haven't had the chance to read the book, but I look forward to doing that. So perhaps my question is not informed, by the content of your book, but I look forward to reading that. I was curious to understand whether you drew any insights into how the search for remaining in power, consolidating in power for survival might have affected somehow relations within the AKP, intra-party relations, especially as the external threats coming from the Kemalist elite were kind of dissipating after 2007, 2011. The AKP is perhaps known to be, the longest-lived government party, but is less known to be one of the most factionalized parties. So I was really curious to understand, at the end of the day, who survives in power. I hope I don't want you to spoil the end of the book for those who haven't read it, but it would be great if you could share some insights from your research.
Over to you, Çağlar. If you could be a little brief, just because we're pushed on time, that would be wonderful, without meaning to cut off the informative answers either.
Okay, thank you so much. The first is about Bura's question for the methodology. Thank you so much, Bura. It's an important point because I mentioned about 4 independent variables and one, the explanatory dependent variable, which is the political survival. And how can we make a connection between this with it? In my book, I will try to use the intervening variables to make a connection between these the different variables. What is the meaning? For example, we talk about the legitimizing of conservatism in Turkey. Okay, how the legitimizing of the conservatism may ensure the AKP survival. I will focus on 28 February military coup process because these are intervening variables, or the adoption of the conservative democracy. When we look at the second period, I talk about the AKP's fight against the secular Kemalist elites. Okay, how this helped to AKP's survival. I especially focused on Ergenekon and Balyoz cases, and I try to use them as an intervening variables. Intervening variables have helped to make a connection between these variables. For example, in populism, as I said in my presentation, I mentioned about anti-Westernism, anti-Kemalism. Okay, how anti-Westernism helped to ensure the survival. I can try to make a connection between these variables with using these intervening variables. These intervening variables is related about more specific topics or events in Turkish politics. For example, in the last period, okay, the combination of Islamism and nationalism. Okay, how AKP can do that? I try to understand the role of 15 July coup attempt. It's an important variable for me for understanding these two dimensions, the relations between these two dimensions. So it's an important helping issue for me. Another question for Sylvia. Many thanks for this. I especially focused on in some parts of my book, I especially focused on inter-party conflict. I choose the data collection methods as elite interviews, and I I made an interview with some ex-AKP politicians. One of them is Abdülatif Şener, is the founder of the AKP, but he resigned this position. Another of them is the Suat Kınıklıoğlu, who is the vice president of the AKP in the second term of between 2007 and 2011. And all of my participants explain, okay, why the AKP started different, and then AKP did completely different policies when it starts. So we can see the inter-party conflict in AKP. I believe that most of the academics in the Turkey did not pay attention about inter-party conflict in the AKP, but we can see many examples of this. But if you ask who survives, I think the answer is very simple: Recep Tayyip Erdoğan. Because after 2014, we can see the increasing role of Erdogan's leadership in the party. Before 2014, we can see another actors, like, for example, Abdullah Gül. For example, before 2016, Ahmet Davutoğlu. I tried to make a clash between Davutoğlu and Erdogan in my last chapter, chapter 5. But I completely agree that inter-party conflict is important. And I think inter-party conflict helps, especially Erdogan's, the survival in the AKP. We don't know that if another actors will continue as a leader of AKP can be survived. I'm not sure that, but I completely agree with it. The inter-party conflict is important. And if you look at my book, you can see the details, especially in the interviews. I try to make an interview with ex-AKP politicians. Normally, I try to make a connection with another AKP members, but it is not easy for me. But I try to make an interviews, especially ex-AKP founding members, to understand these political challenge during the 16 years. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Çağlar. So we are scheduled to finish in 3 minutes. So let me just use those last 3 minutes to do a few thank yous. Thank you, of course, to everybody for attending and all the people for asking questions. I think I really add an awful lot to the discussion. Thank you to Elvira and Natalie for agreeing to be discussants. It really laid an excellent foundation for the Q&A to follow. But most of all, thank you to Çağlar and Ayşe for 2 fascinating books. And I think the response to them both shows that you've produced very impressive pieces of work. And we all seem very keen on including them in reading lists and reading them fully in due course. So thank you both for informative presentations. I really thought they were excellent. Just as a last small plug, in order to encourage everybody, we, of course, in the Turkish Political Studies Association would like you to all join our group if you haven't already. Yaprak has very kindly posted the link through which you can join our group in the chat box. So if you wouldn't mind, it's free to join. Clicking and join the link if you haven't already, that will be wonderful to us. Otherwise, thank you everybody for coming. Lovely to see you all. If anyone would like to present their books in due course, email us, because we'd like to keep this forum going. And the very last, administrative thing I forgot to mention, for those who joined late, we recorded this session. If there was anybody who would rather not be featured in the recording, can you email us and we'll try and edit you out the video afterwards before we put it on our website. If we don't hear from you, we'll assume you're all good to be included. All right, well, that's it for me. Lovely to see you all. Hopefully next time we can meet, it'll be in person. And we'll have more online events in due course. So do follow us on Twitter and check your email. We'll keep you up to date. Otherwise, thank you to everybody again and goodbye. Have a lovely afternoon and evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.